Welcome to our exploration of Interior Kosmos Exterior, where we journey through the profound connections between consciousness and cosmos. I'm Dr. Thomas Mercer, a philosopher of science and consciousness studies.
And I'm Dr. Elena Valdez, specializing in comparative mysticism and poetics. Today, we're delving into a remarkable text that weaves together quantum physics, ancient wisdom traditions, and poetic insight to reveal the hidden continuities between our inner experience and the outer universe.
The title itself, Interior Kosmos Exterior, suggests a dissolution of boundaries between what we perceive as our inner realm and what we consider the external universe. This text invites us to reconsider that division altogether.
Absolutely, Thomas. The introduction frames this beautifully. We live suspended between what we perceive and what transcends us. There's this intuition throughout that individual consciousness is not separate from the cosmos, but rather its reflection, synthesis, vibration. It reminds me of the ancient Hermetic principle, as above, so below.
That principle resonates through every section of the text. I was particularly struck by how scientific concepts like quantum vacuum, dark matter, and relativistic time are transformed into symbols of ontological mystery. The author draws from contemporary physics but transmutes these scientific models into poetic meditation.
What's fascinating is how the text organizes this journey, beginning with origin, moving through separation and energy and void, before exploring principle and non-being, and finally return and transmutation. It's structured almost like a cosmological cycle, mirroring both scientific models of universal evolution and spiritual narratives of emanation and return.
Let's start with the concept of the void, which appears repeatedly in the text. In Section 3, we encounter lines like hostile nature of the cosmic vacuum and cosmic void and universal solitude. This void isn't merely empty space, but seems to hold generative potential. From a quantum perspective, vacuum isn't nothing. It's a field of virtual particles and fluctuating energy.
The void described here reminds me of the Taoist concept of wu, or emptiness, not as absence but as potentiality. There's also resonance with the Buddhist shunyata, emptiness as the interdependent nature of all phenomena. The text captures this when it says, "We belong to one another, as spaces of void belong to fullness, and as the darkness of eternal space divides the light of the stars."
That's a beautiful observation. And speaking of light and darkness, there's a fascinating passage that complicates our tendency to equate darkness with evil. The known world is light, but there exists the darkness of matter, which is not dark because it is evil, but because it is unknown.
That reframing of darkness as simply the unknown rather than something negative feels deeply significant. It suggests that our fears and prejudices about darkness might be epistemological rather than moral. We fear what we don't understand. The text continues this thought by noting that death is not an evil, but a consequence of life that we must learn to know and face.
The relationship between consciousness and being forms another central theme. In one section, there's the striking declaration, "Energy is mind," and later, "Intellect is matter," wave-like form of curvature in space-time. These statements suggest a non-dualistic perspective where consciousness and physical reality aren't separate substances, but different manifestations of the same underlying something.
Yes, and that something resists easy definition. The text employs Latin phrases like sine tempore, sine materia, sine luce, without time, without matter, without light, to gesture toward what lies beyond conceptualization. It's reminiscent of apophatic theology, where the divine is approached through negation rather than positive attributes.
The literary style reinforces this sense of approaching the ineffable. The use of fragmentary lines, the interweaving of Latin and English, the abundance of colons and dashes, these formal elements create a sense of speech that's reaching beyond ordinary discourse. The text often reads almost like incantation.
I noticed that too. There's a rhythmic quality that feels ceremonial, especially in passages like reincarnatio, ascenatio, reditus ad originum. The repetition creates an almost hypnotic effect. And the typography, all capitals in many sections, gives the impression of ancient inscriptions or sacred texts.
The scientific references are particularly fascinating to me. There are mentions of baryonic sensory perception, quantum fluctuations, and curvature in space-time. These aren't just decorative, they're integral to the philosophical exploration. When the text states, "We are quantum fluctuations, unaware quarks of cyclical transformations," it's using quantum mechanics to reframe human existence.
And these scientific concepts blend seamlessly with spiritual traditions. We see references to pleroma, the fullness of divine powers in Gnosticism, alongside mentions of quantum dust. There are nods to Vedanta, samsara, and the cyclical nature of existence that appear alongside discussions of cosmic cycles and multiverses.
This integration creates a unique perspective where science and mysticism aren't opposed, but complementary ways of approaching reality. The microcosm-macrocosm relationship appears early in the text. Microcosm and its conflict, though minute and insignificant, is a reflection of the infinite macrocosm.
That relationship between microcosm and macrocosm extends to the self and consciousness. Near the end, we find the striking assertion, universum non aliud ad ipso me. The universe is nothing other than me. This suggests a non-dualist awareness where subject and object dissolve.
The theme of cycles and return is particularly powerful. The text speaks of cyclical aeonic universes and suggests that our individual existences are part of larger cosmic patterns. We are and are not like those who will come and the lives before us in these simultaneous temporal universes.
That cyclical vision connects to the final section on return and transmutation. There's this sense that existence isn't linear, but circular, or perhaps spiral, with each return occurring at a different level. The text mentions samsara and reaggregation of matter, linking the Buddhist concept of rebirth with physical processes of cosmic renewal.
I'm struck by how the text frames the relationship between perception and reality. It states, "We are perception" at one point, and elsewhere says, "Reality lies beyond perceptive matter." There's a constant awareness of the limitations of human understanding, yet also an affirmation that consciousness itself participates in the cosmic order.
That tension between the limits of perception and the possibility of transcendence runs throughout. The phrase separatus a mundo objectivo, ob perceptionem individuale, appears repeatedly, suggesting our sense of separation is an artifact of how we perceive.
Yet the text doesn't leave us in isolation. There's that beautiful passage, "We belong to one another, as spaces of void belong to fullness, and as the darkness of eternal space divides the light of the stars."
The poetic technique reinforces this paradox of separation within unity. The text often juxtaposes contradictory elements, light and darkness, being and non-being, the infinitesimal and the vast. These oppositions aren't resolved so much as held in creative tension.
What emerges for me is a vision of consciousness as not confined to individual minds, but as a fundamental aspect of the cosmos. When the text says, "Energy is mind," it suggests that what we call consciousness might be intrinsic to reality itself, not an accident or epiphenomenon.
That reminds me of what the philosopher Thomas Nagel calls panpsychism, the view that consciousness or mind-like qualities are fundamental to nature. This text seems to explore that possibility through poetic language rather than analytical argument.
The writing also engages deeply with transformation. Near the end, we read about a multitude of molecules scattered in the infinite disintegrated into atoms and then subatomic particles, suggesting that physical dissolution is part of a larger process. The next line is particularly striking. The next step of existence is not individuality, myriad.
That move beyond individuality connects to many mystical traditions, the dissolution of the separate self into a larger wholeness. The text describes this as expansio ultra ego, expansion beyond the ego, and as a transmigration between states of consciousness.
As we conclude our exploration, I'm reminded of the text's introduction, which describes each poem as a threshold of meaning, a passage where the word seeks to become vision, merge with silence, and inhabit the unknown. This is exactly what we've experienced in our discussion, language reaching toward what lies beyond language.
Yes, and the text itself acknowledges this paradox. It's using words to point beyond words, employing concepts to suggest what transcends conceptualization. Perhaps that's why it ends with images of dissolution and transformation, recognizing that fixed meanings must ultimately give way to direct experience.
Interior Kosmos Exterior invites us to see the universe not as an object external to us, but as a reflection of consciousness itself. In this vision, there's no center, no margin, only forms that emerge and dissolve, luminous traces in the field of cosmic consciousness.
And with that beautiful image, we'll bring our contemplation to a close. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the interior and exterior cosmos, where the boundaries between self and universe dissolve into a luminous wholeness.
Until next time, may you discover the cosmos within and the self without.